On one bloody day in 1862, the U.S. suffered more casualties than their entire Afghanistan campaign. Abraham Lincoln won the presidential election in 1860 on the back of an anti-slavery agenda. After Lincoln's victory in the election, some southern states seceded to form the Confederate States of America. The seceded territory never gained sovereign recognition and quickly went to war with the North. The theater of the American Civil War was set. On September 17, 1862, U.S. President Abraham Lincoln got the great victory he had desired ever since the outbreak of the American Civil War over a year before. Declaring victory would give him the political breathing space he needed to emancipate the slaves. The victory had come from Antietam Creek in Maryland. The Union remembered it as the Battle of Antietam, and the Confederacy as the Battle of Sharpsburg. The battle was not a victory for either side. It was more like a bloody stalemate, except for the fact that the troops of the North remained near the battlefield, while the rebels moved to a position that was more suited for defense. The battles of Gettysburg, Spotsylvania, Chickamauga, and the Wilderness proved more lethal, but the intensity of Antietam was unmatched. 2,100 Union and 1,550 Confederate casualties in one day shocked the troops, the civilian population, and the political leaders. The Battle of Antietam was the bloodiest single-day battle in the Civil War, and the victory that Lincoln needed to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. Still, at the time, the reaction to the battle was far from unanimous. Lincoln, members of his cabinet, Congress, the press, and the public hoped that General George McClellan would take advantage of the situation and pursue the retreating rebels back into Virginia and to their capital, Richmond. But as he had done so many times before, McClellan hesitated, coming up with reasons for not chasing the rebels. General McClellan, known as young Napoleon in the press, had been a problem for quite some time. In the summer of 1861, Lincoln appointed McClellan the head of the Army of the Potomac, and soon after made him the commander of all Union forces. As the war went on, Lincoln and others began to realize that McClellan was excessively cautious for a general in command of a mighty army. He was perhaps more concerned with not losing his army or reputation rather than winning victories. President Lincoln famously said, "If General McClellan is not using the army, perhaps he might let me borrow it." Just before the Peninsula campaign, Lincoln removed McClellan from the overall command of the Union armies. During the 7 Days Battle at the end of the Peninsula campaign, McClellan's troops fought relatively well, but were fooled by a Confederate general, Robert E. Lee, on multiple occasions. Lincoln forced McClellan into semi-retirement, only to bring him back when his replacement did not work out at the Second Battle of Bull Run, where Robert E. Lee had struck again. In early September 1862, Robert E. Lee, fresh off the Confederate victories at the Second Battle of Bull Run and Jackson's Shenandoah campaign, launched an invasion of Maryland, with the ultimate goals of taking pressure off Richmond and cutting Union supplies to Washington from the breadbasket of Pennsylvania. In the next few days, McClellan and Lee faced each other on two crucial fronts, the battles of South Mountain and Harpers Ferry. On September 14th, while the Battle of Harpers Ferry was going on, McClellan engaged the Confederates at South Mountain, to the northeast of Harpers Ferry by some 20 miles. South Mountain was not a peak, it was more of a heavily wooded ridge. It included three main gaps: CRAMPTON'S Gap, Turner's Gap, and Fox's Gap, through which roads for local commerce passed. Toward dark, the Union generals had begun to pressure the Confederates at Fox's and Turner's Gaps after hard fighting among rocks, trees, and underbrush. Lee elected to retreat toward Sharpsburg, between the Potomac River and Antietam Creek to the west. During the South Mountain fighting, Lee received word about the fall of the Union garrison at Harpers Ferry. That evening, Lee sent word to Jackson to head toward Sharpsburg. Lee decided to take up a dangerous position near Sharpsburg, a small town whose population today is only about 800. It was roughly the same in 1862. The river near Sharpsburg is not nearly as wide as it is near Washington, D.C., but it is wide enough that if Lee and his forces were bottled up in the area, they would probably only have one bridge with which to remove his army. Sharpsburg itself was essentially in the middle of Lee's lines. The Potomac protected Lee's rear if McClellan attempted a wide flanking move. However, Lee and the entire country knew McClellan would not try such a move. Antietam Creek ran from the north to the south in Lee's front, and many would call the creek a small river. Though the creek had shallow enough places for a man to cross in waist-deep water, 3 main bridges spanned the waterway. A mile and a half above Sharpsburg was a series of woods punctuated by farm fields on rolling hills. The rebels positioned themselves around the West Woods, using the Dunker Church as a base of operations and an anchor point for their defense. The church was so named for a pacifist sect that baptized their congregants by dunking them rather than using the more common method of pouring water on the head. From north to south ran the Hagerstown Pike, the central roadway north that linked the larger town of Hagerstown to Sharpsburg, which was 13 miles away. To the south of the woods and the Dunker Church, just east of the Hagerstown Pike, was the Sunken Road, now referred to as Bloody Lane. In the morning, the battle took place in the north around the Dunker Church, in an area simply remembered as Cornfield. At 5:30 a.m., Union General Joseph Hooker ordered 3 divisions to move out. General Abner Doubleday was on the right, General George Meade was in the center, and General James Ricketts, another West Pointer and native New Yorker, on the left. The first 2 columns moved through the North Woods and the last made its way to the East Woods. General Joseph Hooker moved with his men toward the Dunker Church and the cornfield north and east. In that cornfield, Hooker and his men saw glinting Confederate bayonets among the stalks. So he called up more guns, and 6 batteries opened fire, giving the cornfield its historic name. From about 6 to 6:45 a.m., both sides poured in reinforcements to the area. Throughout the morning, on both sides of the Hagerstown Pike, unit after unit was thrown into the fighting. The cornfield was only about 250 yards deep and about 400 yards wide, but hundreds of dead and wounded bodies were in it. That day, the cornfield changed hands 15 times. By 9 a.m., the Union held most of the area east of the Hagerstown Pike. It had been a slaughterhouse, but the day was still young. Antietam was chaotic. 1,000 movements of units, large and small, were fighting over the same ground as they had in the cornfield. The fighting began in the north, near the Dunker Church and the cornfield. Then it flared up in the center and ended at the southern end of the battlefield. As the fight began to move southward, a Union brigade under General William French came head-to-head against a rebel unit headed by D.H. Hill. The rebels were outnumbered, but they possessed good ground. They sat atop a small gradual ridge in the road, which had been sunken from years of traffic, with rail fences lining both sides. For the rebels, this was a trench, and the men from French's division were coming right at them. French lost 30% of his divisions in multiple advances to the road. Leaders on both sides soon realized that the battle had shifted south, so they sent more and more units to the area around the sunken road. Robert E. Lee sent over 3,000 men under Major General Richard H. Anderson to aid Hill. Simultaneously, another 4,000 Union men moved in under Major General Israel B. Richardson to prevent French's divisions from being surrounded. By noon, the Confederate forces had lost several officers, and their confidence had dwindled. As the Union forces pushed for a 5th attack, they were initially successful, but quickly outflanked as they pursued the Confederate troops. Both sides were exhausted. In the fighting that took place there from 9:30 a.m. to 1 p.m., an estimated 5,600 casualties were sustained by both sides. As the Confederates retreated, soldiers on the field knew the sunken road as the Bloody Road. Still, the day was not over. Another part of the battlefield was about to erupt in the south, and it would be no less a slaughter. George McClellan's original plan was for the southern part of his armies to move against the men in gray in a diversionary attack to support the Union effort in the northern part of the battlefield. But several factors changed his plan. Firstly, the orders for General Ambrose Burnside to launch his attack did not reach the bearded general until 10 a.m., when the northern battle had been going on for 4 bloody hours. Second, the relationship between Burnside and McClellan had been strained for the past few days. No matter when the orders arrived, Burnside's job would not be easy. His front faced Antietam Creek, which was too deep to ford in many places. 3 bridges crossed the creek in its run through the battlefield. Burnside's men faced the southernmost bridge, Rohrbach's Bridge. The bridge was an arched stone structure just wide enough for 4 men to cross in a line abreast. Burnside had 12,500 men and 50 cannons on his side of the bridge. Had he acted sooner in the morning, he might have won the day for the Union much earlier and saved countless lives. But he did not get his orders and was a cautious man by nature, and his surveillance was sorely lacking. Burnside had a 5 or 6 to 1 advantage, but the ground partially negated that on the other side of the bridge with excellent cover and vantage points. Brigadier General Robert Toombs of Georgia was the Southern general in command. Keen on a great battle, he waited for the Union troops around the creek. After McClellan's orders reached Burnside, the Union forces tried to cross the creek from the sides. The first 2 attempts failed, but the third, around 12:30 p.m., yielded results. Colonel Edward Ferraro's 51st New York and 51st Pennsylvania regiments took the bridge after an intense half-hour of fighting. The Union had the bridge, but it came at a high cost. They suffered 500 casualties to the Georgians' 150. Due to mismanagement regarding ammunition, rations, and units, the bridge witnessed a traffic jam of Union soldiers. Robert E. Lee took these 3 hours to position his troops. Worse still for the Federals, the ground moving toward the town was sloped, and the rebels had the high ground. At 3 p.m., Burnside gave the order, and for the next 2.5 hours, the Union assaulted the rebel positions. By 5:30 p.m., the rebels had had enough. Unfortunately, at the time, the Union Army leaders were not ready for the decisive action needed to claim total victory. McClellan had thousands of men yet to see the battle. He could have moved them past his exhausted soldiers and likely taken the town. McClellan might have ended the war by trapping Lee and his army on the eastern side of the Potomac, but he was again convinced that Lee had more men than he really did. The next day, a short truce was arranged to remove the injured men from the field and exchange the wounded taken as prisoners. That evening, Lee began his withdrawal back into Virginia, and the war would go on for 2.5 more years. The casualties in the battle were as follows: 12,410 Union, including 2,108 dead, and the Confederate casualties at 10,317 with 1,547 dead. People were still finding bleached bones of unburied bodies years later. How would you like to get a deeper understanding of history, impress your friends, and predict the future more accurately based on past events? If this sounds like something you might be into, then check out the brand new Captivating History Book Club by clicking the first link in the description. To learn more about the Battle of Antietam, check out our book, The Battle of Antietam, a captivating guide to an important battle of the American Civil War. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.